My name is Dorothy Hodgson. I'm a professor and chair of anthropology at Rutgers University. I'm a historical anthropologist. I've worked in Tanzania for about 25 years with a group called Maasai. They're pastoralists and herders, and in that work I've looked at changing gender relations and gender and social change, power in the colonial and post-colonial period, and various aspects of that. The work I'm doing that's most relevant to the theme of the conference is my current project on gender justice, which is looking at different historical regimes from the early codification of colonial law and customary law to the imposition of national law, and now to women's human rights regimes, and the ways that ideas about and assumptions about gender and culture get encoded in those, and then what those experiences of that are on the ground. And so ideas about marriage and polygamy and female genital modification and practices that occur in the community with whom I work are all part of that. So I'm in part looking at the echoes over time of these kind of recurring debates and assumptions. Well, in terms of, again, the research that's relevant for the conference, and what's been interesting is the fact that we think about marriage as a kind of, that there's some normative practice of marriage in different groups. And in the paper that I'm going to give a little bit later, the documents, the archives, and oral history suggest that that's really not the case, that there's actually this range of forms of marriage, some of which women have a great deal of choice and autonomy. That is, they elope with or move in with their lovers rather than agreeing to and participating in arranged marriages. And the fact that I'm going to talk about in my research today a document from the 1950s that the elder men kind of talked about these really kind of four categories of wives. And one of those categories was what they call kind of free lovers. And so it challenges ideas of the victimized, oppressed African women and so forth, and suggests that again, that the range of forms suggests a range of possibilities for consent and autonomy in relationships, and that we need to be careful when we use terms like marriage, that they don't blind us to these other kinds of ways of being. Yeah, see, I'm not necessarily, again, in the area I work in, forced marriage doesn't really work for me. Because I think, both terms are problematic, right? What is meant by forced and the issues of power, consent, authority that are implied there. And as I just suggested, what do we mean by marriage? So my own research, suggests that this thing called normal marriage, even in the United States, what is normal marriage? And we get dominant ideas of marriage that are put forth as a kind of preferred or normative kind. But for me, anytime that happens, that's about power. And we need to understand who is putting forth a particular definition of marriage as the normative one. Why then? And they're the kinds of questions that anthropologists and historians ask. And so forced marriage, I think, it's useful in that it really brings the issues of power relations to the foreground. But I find that my own work, at least, and I think that of many others, kind of problematizes some of that and suggests that while politically that might be useful for certain kinds of projects to talk about forced marriage, it also, again, masks the complexities of what's happening on the ground. And again, I do think it's important to distinguish, a lot of my recent work has been with activists and advocates. And so, as is the case in any kind of political struggle, people who themselves understand the complexities, you don't get a lot of media attention or political traction when all you say is it's complex, right? And so you often have to do what Gayatri Spivak talks about is kind of strategic essentialism, right? You've got to essentialize, you've got to have the soundbite or something to kind of make your case. And so again, forced marriage can do that, child marriage can do that. And so we need to try to distinguish between what's being done for certain kinds of political struggles, and we can't, as academics, just criticize that or, that reduces it, because we have to understand those struggles and why they're happening. But we then have to distinguish in scholarly and academic work the fact that it is more complicated and the ways that sometimes the use of those terms can mask and blind us to what's happening. And that can be I think a quite uneasy tension between the kind of academic or scholarly and political uses of language.